I'm Damian Tarnopolsky. I'm the creative lead at the Narrative-Based Medicine Lab at Continuing Professional Development at Temity Medicine at the University of Toronto. It's my pleasure to welcome you to this celebration of the lab and our 50th episode of the NBM Talks podcast. But first, where we are, the land on which the University of Toronto operates for thousands of years has been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and the Mississaugas of the Credit. Today, this meeting place is still the home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to work on this land. Thanks again for joining us. We're here for a live recording of the NBM Talks podcast, which we're hoping is going to be as collaborative and interactive as everything that we do at the lab. We'll encourage you to speak with us and ask us questions and engage with our panel. I'm joined tonight by Sarah Kim to my left, Allan Peterkin in the center, and Karen Gold. I'll introduce them more fully in a moment or two, but first I'm going to tell you a little bit more about the lab and what we've been up to recently. I hope it's interesting to you. It's quite exciting to me. It's going to take 2 or 3 minutes. Well, I lie. It's going to take a little bit longer. The Narrative-Based Medicine Lab is an unusual place in many ways, not least that we don't have a physical lab as such. When we come together online or in person, we are the lab, which means that you tonight are the lab. Thank you for being here. This is a place for health practitioners, for patients, anyone with a connection to healthcare and to health who is curious about the ways that narrative and medicine connect to each other and influence each other. This is a place for people who are listening to their patients' stories, who are wondering about their own, thinking about what larger story they're part of. We hear again and again that this is the place for people in health who didn't realize they were already working narratively, and pleased to discover that there's a field here and skills that they can get better at using and a community to be part of. This is a place for those of us in healthcare or in the world generally who want to stay human, to adapt the title of one of Allan's books. It's a place that we hope is unusually open and non-hierarchical, unhierarchical, anti-hierarchical, where patients meet physicians, learners meet teachers on equal ground, and everyone gets the chance to speak and be heard. Everyone's story matters, no matter who they are or where they're speaking from. I hope that's been your experience at the lab, if you've been part of our work already. I'm realizing I'm excluding people already by giving my back to you. So I hope that you'll feel a part of the lab as well tonight and join and ask us questions and be part of our conversation. It's a place where we read and write together, a place where a need is met or understood. And so we hope it's a place where things can change for the better. More formally, statistically, we offer the Narrative-Based Medicine Foundational Certificate. We've now gone through 17 cohorts of the certificate with well over 300 registrants in the last 5 years. We've offered 35 additional fee-bearing offerings, which represent close to 600 registrants in our accredited programming. This includes workshops and programs on health arts research, palliative care, illness narratives, self-compassion, health-themed articles, and many more. In January, we have a new offering for those of you who want to finish that piece that you're working on and get it out into the world. It's one of our graduates is leading it, the doctor and writer, Rory O'Sullivan. It's called From Page to Publication, and it's open for registration now. I encourage you to sign up for that if you're interested, or talk to one of us afterwards and we'll tell you more about it. We love seeing our participants become our faculty. It's also very exciting to see people take this work elsewhere around the world in their own teaching and research. Recently in New York, Jeff Thompson has started an OAR project, and his OAR project on narrative and resilience. From Calgary, Janet de Groot's work on poetic inquiry in oncology. Here at U of T, Lorianne Noya's narrative medicine wellness workshops for anesthesia residents beginning, and she developed these as part of her mentored project in our advanced certificate. Beyond our teaching, we do this in other ways through free and community events like this one, readings, literary lunch hours, alumni coffee hours, partnerships with arts organizations and health humanities projects. To date, almost 650 registrants have attended our free community events. So if you put that all together, since January 2021, over 1,500 participants have attended narrative events at CPD. Big round of applause. So it's a big number, and it's something we're very proud of and delighted to always be welcoming more people and adding to that number. Our website at narrative-based-medicine.ca is our digital home. You'll find pieces there by our participants and friends, news from the world of narrative-based medicine. In the new year, a new project, Case Repertory, which is a narrative reinvention of the traditional case report, edited by a participant and friend of the lab, Connor McDonnell, who also has a new book out himself, a long poem about opioid addiction, about language, about the universe. I commend it to you highly. It's a superb book. Our participants are spreading the word and taking this work elsewhere in other ways. The lab has been or will shortly be featured in the Globe and Mail, At the Word on the Street, Hospital News, and Medscape. Our participants and faculty have published creative and reflective works recently, such as Ronna Bloom's new book of poems, In a Riptide, which she says is for the fragile, the baffled, the worried among us, for me. Ray Torbiak's written a medical thriller, Novichok, in which a surgeon becomes an unwilling assassin. Cynthia Gralla has just published an essay on kinship and family in Best Canadian Essays 2026. We're delighted for them and proud of them and encourage them to continue taking their narrative work around the world. All this is to say that starting from nothing, or starting from a very quiet and awkward Zoom meeting between me and Trevor Cuddy at CPD and Suzanne Schneeweiss, based on Alan's idea that CPD might be the right place for this work. So based on a few small elements, little roots and seeds, this has been an extraordinary success. To thank the people who have made it a success. It's happened thanks to the indefatigable work of curriculum lead Karen Gold, who's here, is going to be speaking soon, to make this a coherent educational offering, alongside Chris Chipman's efforts to make it financially viable, Monica Kribari and Nicole Nobrega actually making things happen day to day, and Chelsea Matson, with the help of Zainab Arslan, doing extraordinary work to publicize, make the lab public, make people want to come and join us, together with Diego Altamira Olvera, Matt Jiggins, many others, under the inspiring and encouraging leadership of Trevor Cuddy, the profoundly important support of Suzanne Schneeweiss and Patricia Houston at CPD. I'm sorry if I've left you out. If you're here, if you're sitting in this room, you've participated, if you've just enjoyed things at the lab, you've contributed. Even if you're here out of curiosity, you are the lab, as I said before. So thank you very much for being here. And please give yourself a big round of applause for being such a wonderful lab. Thank you. Okay, we have a podcast. We're here tonight to celebrate the upcoming 50th episode of our podcast, which we're all kind of amazed by. This began, as many lab projects do, with several of us in a meeting and Trevor saying, what if we did? And this is a project that we took up, and it's become a great adventure, I think, as much as anything else. We recorded a pilot, first of all, a video pilot with Karen and I speaking about the lab and introducing it. We discovered that neither Karen nor me can say the word narrative when we're on camera. We just through about 45 retakes trying to introduce ourselves and introduce the name of this place. We've expanded to speaking with our participants when they pass through town, interviewing our faculty about their work and their interests, talking to writers with a foot in the health world, healthcare people with a stake in writing. Most recently, we've been sitting down with our brilliant international advisory board members, and thanks to Sarah's deep and extensive involvement with the podcast, we've offered a platform to the theme leads from the Faculty of Medicine. So it's not only showcasing the lab, but also introducing, explaining, and building a community in the health humanities. And it has narrative qualities, as you'll know if you've listened to an episode. We ask open-ended questions. We try ideas out. We like things to be, well, like tonight, you'll see, not too structured, not too unstructured, to allow space for exploration and discovery. And it's another way into the work of the lab. One of the pleasures of it is that we give our guests time to share a creative or reflective piece of their own, or share a narrative-based medicine exercise, which makes it feel intimate and personal as well as practical. And I want to thank Julio Aguilar and his team at MedIT, who have done an amazing production job keeping that intimate, conversational feel for the podcast and communicating that to the audience. To celebrate our upcoming 50th episode, we're recording live with you. We invite you to be part of this. We've assembled a panel of guests from the lab who've made contributions to the lab and who have been guests or hosted the podcast. I have some questions for them at the beginning to get the ball rolling, and then we'll open up the discussion for you all to ask your questions. So if you have narrative questions on your mind, you have questions about health and writing and literature on your mind, if you were provoked or prompted by anything that you've heard already, we'll have a mic available to you in the audience, and we'll just ask you to introduce yourself and ask your question. All of our guests tonight have extremely impressive and long bios, which I'm going to drastically edit as I introduce them to you, starting with Karen. Karen Gold is curriculum lead of the Narrative-Based Medicine Lab and co-instructor of our foundational certificate. With over 25 years' experience as a clinical social worker and educator, she's developed interprofessional programs in reflective practice, patient-centered care, narrative healthcare, and narrative pedagogy. She leads the popular Resilience in Practice workshop at the lab and continues to publish and lead workshops on writing, clinician well-being, and the health humanities. Here, to my left, Dr. Sarah Kim is a physician, dance artist, and somatic educator who serves as medical education health humanities theme lead at Temity Medicine and directs the program in health arts and humanities. Her clinical practice spans narrative medicine, sports and exercise medicine, and psychotherapy. Formerly lead physician for Canada Basketball's women's elite program, she integrates movement, mindfulness, and critical humanities into medical education and care. And finally, Dr. Allan Peterkin is Professor of Psychiatry and Family Medicine at the University of Toronto and founder of the program in Health, Arts and Humanities. A pioneer of narrative-based medicine, in Canada he has authored 15 books on physician health, cultural history, and medical humanities, and co-founded the Canadian Association for Health Humanities and the Ars Medica Literary Journal. He's the recipient of the Health Humanities Consortium Visionary Award and continues to champion storytelling and reflection in healthcare. A warm welcome to you all. Thank you for being here. And I'd like to begin the conversation really with a question for Allan. Allan, if you could tell us a little more than I've said about the importance of narrative-based medicine as a field and how the lab came into the particular landscape at U of T.
Sure, I'd be happy to, and welcome everybody. Thank you so much for coming out. And from your remarks, I'm just struck at what a sort of community of practice we're building, and we've built multidisciplinary, interprofessional. We call it narrative medicine or narrative-based medicine, but we've had every clinical discipline, and we've had journalists from across the world participate. So I thought I'd tell you the history of narrative medicine, as it's called in the US, narrative-based medicine, as it's called in the UK. We tend to call it both things here in Canada. Medicine was always a storied enterprise. a doctor and would meet with a patient. Often patients would write letters to the doctor, and a story would unfold of illness and recovery and exploration of suffering. And then in the 18th century, we started getting instruments that measured things like thermometers and stethoscopes, ophthalmoscopes. The field of anatomic pathology deepened. And so commonalities and trends were identified, which could predict outcomes and diagnoses. And it became a quantitative enterprise, which has led today to evidence-based medicine, which looks at, again, commonalities to make a diagnosis. And what was lost really was the individual patient's experience of that illness. So in short, doctors learned how to take a history, but they stopped learning how to receive a story. So many disciplines have been interested in storytelling within a medical context, and this goes back decades and decades. So the medical humanities, as you mentioned, social sciences, literature and medicine, medical anthropology, psychoanalysis. They looked at stories in a medical context, how stories were told, received, distorted, ignored, all of these things. And if you look at the field of psychoanalysis, it's nothing but narrative medicine. It's about deepening a story collaboratively over time. So I'll just give you some of the key names of people who've developed the field and invite you to look up their work, because it's really seminal in the field, and perhaps we can even publish this list on the website. So in the 1950s, we had Michael Ballant, a British psychoanalyst who worked with family doctors. And as you know, family doctors often work with very complicated stories. Probably over half of their work, and you probably agree, is mental health and family dynamic. And so he would meet with them, hear stories, ask pertinent questions to do what he called detangling the story. And this model exists to this day, Ballant groups. And we have a colleague who's actually going to be doing some in the new year, Michael Roberts. Then we had Arthur Frank. Some of you will know his work, University of Calgary, sociologist. And he started categorizing the type of stories patients would tell. And he divided into restitution narratives, where things are restored, things go back to normal. The quest narrative, where the illness brings insight, learning. It's a journey that deepens the humanity of the person who's suffering. And then chaos or chaotic narratives, which just fall apart, have no rhyme or reason, no meaning can successfully be made. And of course, any of you who are clinicians know that things don't fall neatly in any of those. And Arthur Frank himself has written a book called Let Stories Breathe, which again is about resisting overly tight categorization. Then we have Arthur Kleinman, American psychiatrist and anthropologist, and he taught us about the distinction between illness and disease, and illness being the lived, storied experience of that disease. Howard Brody was an American GP and bioethicist who wrote Stories of Sickness, and he reminded us that patients come to their doctors with broken stories, not just broken limbs and broken bodies. Then John Launer, a British GP with a lot of psychodynamic training, wrote a book called Narrative-Based Primary Care. And he, in fact, is on our International Advisory Committee. He's been doing the work for a very long while.
About podcast.
And he's done a podcast with us, yeah. And then in 1998, Tricia Greenhalgh and Brian Hurwitz, both GPs in England, wrote a very seminal book called Narrative-Based Medicine, Dialogue and Discourse in Clinical Practice. And that's really worth a read because each chapter sort of uses a different lens to get at what narrative-based medicine might be. So there's bioethics, there's psychodynamics, there's humanities, there's a primary care focus. And then they look at the interface between narrative-based medicine and evidence-based medicine, and in fact how they can actually deepen each other. And then, of course, you all know the work of Rita Sharon at Columbia. And in 2001, she published a seminal article in JAMA called Narrative Medicine, a Model for Empathy, Reflection, Profession, and Trust. And later went on to write a couple of textbooks. And that Columbia model, some of you I know have done their workshops and done even masters with them, really emphasizes a literary approach and a literary theory-based approach to learning what she calls narrative competence, which is a clinician's ability to work with story. And that's achieved by close reading of literary texts and then reflective and creative writing, which are sort of the bailiwick of our lab. This is what we all do and what we teach. And then I can tell you a little bit about what's happened at University of Toronto. And I've been a psychiatrist at Mount Sinai for 30 years come January. And it was a very hospitable place to arts-based learning and the health humanities. So we had a film series called Cinema Medica. We founded a literary journal called Ars Medica, which continues to this day, and developed a model of therapeutic writing for patients. We would have readings with people like Lawrence Hill and Miriam Taves. So very fertile ground for the work. I myself attended one of the very first workshops at Columbia Narrative Medicine right at their beginning. And what I found very interesting was that it was all doctors at that time. Now, as I've said, it's every clinical discipline and journalism and so forth. But that first cohort, what I found so striking was that over half of those doctors identified themselves as burnt out. So they wanted to find a way back into their work. They wanted to make it fresh again, to find out what was unique and how the stories could sort of get them reflecting more deeply, helping their patients to make meaning about their illness and suffering. And I think we've seen that come through these 25 years later, that there is a health aspect. Reflective practitioners take better care of their patients, but they also tend to be more self-examined and take better care of themselves as well. Damian mentioned that we had the very first Creating Space conference, which was the very first Canadian Medical Humanities, Health Humanities conference. We founded it here in 2008. And session 16 is mid-April in Ottawa. And it goes across the country and showcases what's being done at medical schools across the country. And I'm pleased to say that every med school in Canada now has some mandatory narrative and health humanities teaching, but certainly elective experiences. Not as much as we'd like, but it's happening. Another thing that happened with our program, I was the inaugural lead or health humanities faculty lead. I did that for 2 terms, and now Sarah's in that role and taking us further. But we worked with Massey College and developed a Barbara Moon editorial fellowship. And Damian was a teacher there. And this was for clinical learners to do creative and reflective writing and to workshop their writing. And we had Barbara Sibbald, we had Ann Silversides. They would come for a year and do this work. And then just the final step was that we Mount Sinai at the time had something called the Mount Sinai Psychotherapy Institute. And for 4 years, we offered something called the Narrative Atelier, which was a 3-day intensive, like a weekend, very intensive with multiple forms of arts-based learning. Eva Marie here taught, visual literacy with us and how to read paintings and so on. And then participants could do a project and get a certificate. And sadly, the Mount Sinai Psychotherapy Institute was no more, and we were looking for a home. And that's where we started interfacing with CPD, and we really have found a magnificent home, a very supportive team, and I should say a very rigorous approach to accreditation. So every course we offer goes through stringent accreditation procedures. And as I mentioned, we have the help of an international board with John Launer, Rita Sharon's on there, Alan Bleakley, a humanities scholar from the UK. So I think we're in a really good place, and maybe that sort of tells you the history of the field, the history of the U of T development, and then who do you want to interview next?
Well, first, thank you, because I think yes, now we have a sense of the atmosphere and the particulars, and now I'm going to turn to Karen to flesh that out a little and humanize that and narrate that a little bit. Karen, can you tell us about the lab today? What the high point's been for you being part of the lab? What are the challenges? What do you see coming next? Tell us more.
Yeah, thanks, Damian. Well, I'm going to speak very much from my perspective as a facilitator and instructor. Right now, we're in the middle of a foundational certificate cohort, and I'm also teaching the series on narrative-based medicine and resilience. So I'm very much thinking about it from that point of view. I think for me, one of the real highlights, teaching in the lab, coming from many years working in academic healthcare, teaching hospitals, and working with students, working with clinicians, I really find it very creative to work in a professional development context where the group of students or participants are very diverse. And I think for me, it can be a challenge, but it also is a thing that makes it, for me, one of the most interesting to engage with participants. We have physicians and other healthcare providers. We have researchers, policymakers, writers, artists, patient advocates, people who want to bring this to their own communities. I think you used the word an anti-hierarchical space, which I love that term, because people come together in narrative practice, narrative medicine type spaces in a very different way than usual professional development even, and definitely the way we tend to interact in healthcare contexts. So for me as an educator, that's one of the things that I love. And it's such a broad field. It sort of bleeds a little bit into the arts and health and the larger health humanities. So it really has no borders, which can be challenging, but also very exciting. It can go in a lot of different directions. I was thinking back to when I did my initial narrative medicine training at Columbia, and we all landed in a room together the very first morning. Rita Sharon was welcoming us and introducing us, and she said, narrative medicine is a large house with many rooms. And I always remembered that, and I always come back to that because there are so many different forms it can take and so many different places that it can go. Sometimes makes it a little hard when people say, well, what is it? The elevator pitch, like, what is it? But I think it just gives us so many creative possibilities. So for me as a facilitator and instructor, that's one of the highlights.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Karen. I hope you now have a greater sense of the day-to-day, at least the educator's perspective. And Sarah, I'm wondering if you can take up some of this. if you wish, from Alan's description of the U of T context and the field more generally, or what Karen has described about the interest and the diversity and the depth of the lab. But in particular, speaking about the NBM Talks podcast, what you've learned from recording them, what you've learned from your guests. You've done amazing work diversifying and bringing in your colleagues within the Faculty of Medicine. What's it been like for you, and what would you like to add or change about it?
So I thought it would be interesting to hear, just for the point of view for continuity, that I was part of the first cohort of the Narrative Atelier. And it's just fascinating to arrive here where it's now evolved into the Narrative-Based Medicine Lab. And one of the things that's very difficult about my role as the Medical Education Health Humanities Theme Lead is my job is to convince my colleagues that this work is relevant. And in fact, that this work is actually a way of offering an accessible framework for essentially everything we do in medical practice. And so what's been fun about being a host for the NBM Talks podcast is I specifically made it a project to reach out to educational leaders or the theme leads for Temerity Medicine, and specifically those who did not feel that they either had a creative bone in their body or that they understood what narrative medicine is or the health humanities. And so my style of persuasion is usually a little bit subversive, but gently manipulative, but all of the while with a positive intention of leading you to a place where you already were, but you didn't realize. And so the structure, you may notice the ones I've been the host, I've invited a colleague to tell their story, their clinical story of where they arrived, how they arrived to their theme lead role. And then gently I start to say, oh, how interesting, as you tell me your story and what you do in your practice, it sounds very much like what we are doing in narrative medicine. And by the end of it, all of the colleagues have come to realization, oh, they do actually have quite a bit of their practice, their clinical practice, that is founded in understanding the patient's story and how it's intersecting with theirs as a clinician. And so it's been very exciting to use the NBM Talks platform as a way of examining what happens when stories collide, what happens when you try on a different voice or didn't realize that's what you were doing. And it also then allows some entry into the discussion around professional identity development, because that's often what emerges as we do these podcasts with colleagues who, again, declared that they don't have practice or they don't do anything artistic, and so just having them go through the process of actually convincing themselves is very satisfying on one hand. But then it also offers really wonderful insight. There's some incredible work happening within our faculty at the University of Toronto, a lot of creativity, which you wouldn't necessarily look at it and decide that was creative from a particular lens, but when you unpack it and place it in the framework of how it has evolved out of this individual's journey, their story, and how their voice has changed over time as they've moved from learner to clinician to educator and then leader in their field. And so for me, the NBM Talks has been, again, a wonderful way to broaden the community and reach a broader audience of, again, helping people to understand what narrative is. And from my perspective, so I do have a practice in writing, but my main creative practice has been more in dance and in the body. And so what I'm excited about gently introducing is how you write from the tips of your toes to the ends of your hair, if you still have hair, or the edges of your scalp. And what that actually means. And because we're in this interesting time where you hear words about burnout and wellness, and what does it mean to be embodied in your work? What does it mean to take care of yourself? And what is also interesting with things around narrative-based medicine, and as we introduce it to the learners and also more into faculty development, is how much our stories allow a framework for reframing the very things that you didn't see before through one character's eyes, that is essentially the cause of your burnout, your individual story around why you may not be able to have a boundary. Well, what is it like to try it on? And what's beautiful about this practice is that it provides enough distance because you're actually able to step out. As soon as you frame things as a story, even if it's your own, it allows you to step out and look upon yourself as though you were a character. And that distance, perspective always come from zooming a bit out, and then you're able to zoom back in and I'll and apply a specificity to areas. So it's beautiful work because it is transformative. It has a transformative power. And that's what's wonderful to be able to show.
I just wanted to, in terms of your interest in your work around the relationship we have to our bodies, and one of the things that Damian and I have noticed and talked about over the few years is that the participants who do our class, who are healthcare practitioners, who are clinicians, often, when given the opportunity to write in the class, write about their own illness or disability experiences, what some people call clinician illness narratives. Or so they choose not to write about relationships with patients. They might, but they also write deeply about their own experiences. And often, as with, I think, some of the published work in this area, about how that then informs their work as a practitioner, how it shifts their lens in a very different kind of way. So I just wondered thoughts or how that's connecting as well.
I think absolutely they write about that. And I think other trends we've noticed is that clinicians of all types carry unmetabolized stories. They have a story that rankles them, or they have regrets, or there was a mistake, or there was a missed opportunity, and we all carry those. And I'm sure you've all found that these are stories that emerge. I think working with students, they often write about times where they've been silenced. They didn't know what to say. They didn't know about the boundary. And they're trying to make sense of that, or they've witnessed something unprofessional or something in the hidden curriculum, and they're just trying to process that and make sense of it. And you're right, stepping back, allows them to maybe get a new view on that, and also to problem solve. And then the other way we've used stories is sometimes we get asked to teach teams, and a good short story can sometimes be a proxy when you're talking about team conflict, so that people can talk about a story safely and those characters, but touch on the very issues that their own team is experiencing. So just that it works at so many layers, but I think something we all emphasize is creating a safe, confidential, respectful, professional place, which allows these stories to unfold.
One thing that I have noted with writing or any other medium where you eliminate the need to have to voice it with your physical voice is that there is an emergence of voices that may have been silenced or felt like they don't have a space to emerge. And which is also why when I run workshops or teaching sessions with students, I don't limit it to written word. I'll sometimes take them through whatever creative expression is coming out, whether it be drawing or scribbling or just getting the pen to move on paper, and then transition them to writing. And then sometimes inviting if they feel comfortable. So what's beautiful about it is that they never have to share. And it can be just as provide the release that they're looking for or therapeutic of simply writing it down and then witnessing it with their own eyes, again, with some distance. But there can be another step of simply sharing something. And what's so beautiful about the sharing, like, which is why I think we all love story and film and music, is that as human beings, we're always looking for resonance somewhere in the world, and how much it strikes us when resonance happens. And also when you simply resonate with something that you've written that you didn't know was there. And that's what I find exciting about introducing this to learners and colleagues who may not have dipped their toes into it, is that to allow them to experience a moment where they try on what it's like to express something in a voice, and then they can play with that as well. And so it offers, again, what's nice about it too, it's the realm of play as well, which we now know there's so much data now in the neuropsychological world, like biological, of just why play is so necessary for us, and how it allows us to access a place where is often stamped out, especially in the clinical world, where again, when it becomes numbers and rigid, of just how much we need as human beings to have a place where it's spacious and allows to imagine different kind of worlds and existences.
I find one of the amazing things that we're told and we experience that relates to that is we do an exercise, somebody begins to write following a certain prompt, and by the end of the prompt, I had no idea I was going to be writing about my grandmother. I had no idea I was going to be writing about my sister or my liver. The discovery that comes from play, from safety, is it's always so such a powerful experience for everybody. Relating as maybe as well to the blurring of roles that Allan was talking about, that I mentioned at the beginning as well, that you walk into the lab and you're a practitioner, but you're also a patient. You're a patient first. You're somebody quite high up with an educational role, but suddenly you're learning from the people around you who are much younger than you. That leads to a lot of interesting and unexpected encounters as well. I find when I'm with these three that I have about 500 things that I want to ask them about what they've said, but I'm going to give you the opportunity. I'm going to open the discussion and the conversation to questions from the floor. If you have something that you'd like to find out more about, please raise your hand. If you have something that provoked you or troubled you, I will come to you with the mic so we get your question on the recording as well. And just introduce yourself and ask your questions. Anybody have a first question for us?
Hi, everybody. My name's Lisa Machado. Very nice to be here and to hear all of what's going on with the lab. I'm a patient. I live with a rare blood cancer. I also work in advocacy, and I have a question. Because I think when you are talking about what's happening within the lab, with everyone using their creativity and telling their stories, it sounds very comfortable and cozy and just idyllic. And I can tell you, as a patient and as someone who works with patients and helps them navigate the healthcare, this is not happening out there in a clinical setting. And so I'm interested to know what your feelings and opinions are, and insights on how do we blow that out into this is great work, but it's not benefiting me, as a patient. And so I'm wondering, how can we take this work and actually really add value to it by changing what's happening now in clinical settings?
Could I get
You want to
first up? Yeah, well, thank you for that. I think the purpose of narrative-based medicine is to improve the encounter with the patient and to build that conversation over time. And I can tell you some work that I did at Mount Sinai is for 20 years, we did a therapeutic writing group for men and women living with HIV. And that was about them capturing their own stories in their own words, so their doctors could understand better their families. And again, the act of writing allowed them a perspective. But I think the lab exists because we want to improve the patient experience. We want to deepen that doctor, nurse, physiotherapist, et cetera, patient, client relationship, and to really prioritize the patient voice. And I think we do invite more participation of patients, and you talked about us having advocates to like deepen that work, to even bring the patient voice more to the forefront.
Also to address the point that we're trying to, we're part of a cultural change. And so the history of medicine's culture is one that's very removed. It's dehumanized, which is really what Rita Sharon, when she began the narrative medicine work down in Columbia in 2001, was trying to address that very thing. It's dehumanized for both the patient, but also the provider. We're just deliverers of healthcare. You know, that the burnout is also about that. And so the change is happening. So these programs are becoming more available for patients. And as we continue the work at the lab, we're part of a broader international movement where there is an acknowledgement of the way the system has been is unsustainable and it's unacceptable. And so we're really on the wave of the upswing of a wave that's coming, but may not actually be seen within my career, for example. Because the cultural change, there's a big historical inertia, which is also structural. So hospital systems, clinical systems are not set up to allow this spaciousness for us to just simply connect as human beings. And that is coming as we train the newer generations within these models. As Allan mentioned, all of the medical schools across Canada have some narrative component, not just for ourselves in terms of our own professional well-being, but very much in particular to understand that the person sitting in front of you is a human being with a story. Your story as the person coming in as the care provider is going to collide. How do you arrive together in a collaborative way with a story that can unfold in a manner that respects the dignity of both? So that we are moving towards that. It's hard to feel it, and it's just sprinkles in right now across, but there is a momentum moving against the historical inertia of a dehumanized system.
You know, what I say to med students is, you know, if you become a family doctor, you're going to treat 1,000 cases of congestive heart failure, but that patient in front of you has only one heart. So that's the story you need to get. Yeah.
Thank you so much. It's a wonderful question. And a question at the back. Thanks, Julio.
Thank you so much. My name is Manmeet. I'm a coach and somebody who's used writing all my life to heal myself. And I am doing the foundation course with Karen presently. And I'm just so glad to be here. I'm deeply grateful to all of you for the work that you're doing and very fascinated. I'm curious to know some of the stories that may have transpired at the grassroots level when you finally took the patients through these therapy writing groups. What sort of a change or transformation that you may have witnessed? I'm curious to know that those who don't want to write, what comes out in form of those doodles or lines or dance or movement?
I guess the best thing I ever heard from that very long therapeutic writing group we had at Mount Sinai is one of the participants said, I stopped thinking of myself as a patient and I started to think of myself as a writer. That was the best line we could have heard.
And I'll echo that unexpectedly one of the things that happens is people start with doodles or start with independent phrases or scattered across the page and discover a story through it and discover a story that they weren't expecting to tell. As Sarah was saying, with a different perspective, a different character, a different sense of themselves elaborating. But what I find, and I come to this work more as a writer. I'm not a clinician. Unexpectedly, by stressing craft, by stressing the elements, literary elements that go into narrative and go into story making or poem making, the transformation can go further and deeper. You're giving people particular skills and tools to take a kind of a blurry sort of a metabolized bolus of emotion and make it into something beautiful and sculpted. Sorry, go ahead.
And to add on to that, what I feel we're doing is developing a sense of self-efficacy and empowerment, and in taking something that's what it is when you write or when you use any other expressive form, whether it's through sound or through movement, is that there is the ability to transform something that brings you dread, and as Damian stated, into something that carries beauty and moves into a different space. And I'll give an example of something outside of the written word. Is I have a friend and colleague who is also a dancer who's living with cancer. And she introduced this project to the women who are undergoing chemotherapy with her. And what they did was they recorded the sounds during the chemotherapy sessions. This day they would come each time with dread. And then as a group, they changed it into a soundscape. And in taking this excerpt of a moment that was just so heavy in their bodies, is just moving it into a different space and working with it again from a different perspective and lens. It then became a journey into something that allowed them to experience beauty again and appreciation. And so just the very act of entering into an expressive mode allows, again, voice and an ability to reclaim or redefine a voice for anybody who uses it, both the clinician, caregivers, and patients.
Yeah, it can transform the audience as well, like become something communicated. Clara, do you want to make a comment on that?
More questions?
And this may be the last question.
Thank you. I'm a physician and I've done the foundational course as well as the advanced certificate course, and it really has helped me. But I keep on, hearing Lisa's voice over and over again, because when we really go out there, it really, a lot of times, doesn't really translate into that care that we really want to provide. And now I wonder, with AI making such a forceful stride into medicine, that we'll be canceling all these little progress that we've made into narrative medicine, because it's now creating that experience, that patient physician or patient clinician experience is going to be, I suspect, is really going to be lost even more than it already is. So I wonder if you have any views about that.
I can say something, maybe somebody can pick up on the AI piece. I just wanted to say in response to that and your question as well, Lisa, one of the things that I try to keep in my own mind and that I also share with participants and learners is that I think that for me personally, focusing on very small gestures can be very meaningful. And focusing on things like just paying a little bit more attention to the language that your patient is using, focusing on it for 30 seconds or a minute of a 10-minute appointment, trying to understand something of what they're experiencing and let them know that you've understood it, or that you're acknowledging it. One of my favorite stories that I use in terms of patient advocacy is a very short story about a woman who's going through cancer treatment, who talks about a comment that the nurse made while she was setting up her IV. And it was one sentence, and she did it while she was doing her task, while she was setting up the IV, and it was very impactful. The nurse probably never knew the impact that she had on this patient. So I think also it's easy for us to get overwhelmed because, as Sarah was saying, cultural change in healthcare is very complicated and way too slow for most of our likings. So one of the things I like to focus on is very small things that people can do that can make a difference. That doesn't really answer the AI piece, but maybe.
Sure. I mean, I think we're all, it's sort of brave new world with AI. It brings, I think, I heard a professor from MIT who teaches computer studies saying that what he's emphasizing to his students is that you still have to problem solve and you still have to communicate and you still have to work with story. So it's a tool that in some ways simplifies, what's again generalizable, common, diagnostic, but it's still up to you to personalize that narrative and that treatment. And one nice development that's coming with technology is something we hear over and over from doctors and other clinicians is the electronic medical record. And they're looking down and they're typing, and there's no, as you say, there's no looking for the small gesture or paying attention or being embodied presence because so there's a new technology, I think it's called Scribe, that will actually write down that encounter so the doctor doesn't have to, which means that the doctor could be more present. I'm going to get all the details, but I actually get a chance to be with you. So I think, I hear your sort of tendency towards caution, but I think it brings some opportunity as well.
Just add that Allan has written articles on practical tips for implementing narrative-based medicine that are, well, they're almost microscopic. They don't take a lot of time, but they're incredibly effective. Sarah, go ahead.
The one thing, so with AI, it's more offering a challenge for us to specify with absolute clarity of what stays in the technical realm of medical practice and what is it to actually be with another human being. Because all the AI are different kinds of formulations of collections of voices, but it's a disembodied machine. And there's many things about clinical encounters that are gathered by things that are not verbal in terms of the way you also communicate to the patient and are present with the patient. And also picking up on subtleties that right now where the technology is, it isn't there. And the challenges for medical education is how will we interface with this tool where we don't allow it, because we do have the power to do that. We do have the power to say where this tool will interface and where it doesn't. And so that's what's interesting about the brave new world. And then, you watch a lot of movies where it starts to take over. It is a very intelligent design, but it does still fail at things that we're able to do as human beings. But that also requires us, from a medical education standpoint, of training people to actually treat a person, not just a body with moving parts, which is historically how we're trained. We're trained not to listen, historically. We are trained to look for information in the body as object. And so that is what narrative medicine is helping to fuel us away from, towards something that, again, is humanized, both on the provider side and the receiver.
I just worry that, for example, just an example, that patient-clinician encounter, just the laying of your hand on a patient's body, that is narrative, and I see the upcoming doctors, for example, or students, they rarely do that anymore because so much is now technological. You order your tests, you do all those things, and that laying of the hand is now lost. And that worries me because I think AI is actually going to further, promote that kind of behavior rather than actually giving more time to that interaction, because that interaction is being lost. So those are thoughts that I I sort of worry about.
Worry, the worry is real, and that is putting the impetus on the education side of, again, as we interface with this tool, of us being very clear of what does it mean to be a healthcare provider in a sense that aligns with the values that are stated on the website of your academic program. And so it trusts that there are a good number of the institutions, of people within the institutions that do see this problem in a very real way. And also that we're trying to keep pace with something that's exploding in front of us in a very rapid manner. And the uptake is happening in a way where people don't fully understand the implications of the use of the tool. That it's coming, it's lagging a little bit because of the excitement around hoping that this thing is going to cure your burnout, which it won't, because all tools actually exacerbate the problems that are there underlying to begin with that are not addressed. And so in any case, it's more of a thing of how we do see what is the tool actually going to be used for. While AI is presenting an existential challenge for us at this time, it points even more to the critical value that narrative-based practices bring to the healthcare context.
And with Allan's example, we've had reports from our participants of the enjoyment or the usefulness of the scribe technology as being able to face the patient, touch the patient, but then also the amount of time they have to spend correcting and fixing the errors that the scribe has made, because like all technologies, it's imperfect. I hope that that's a semi-optimistic note. I heard strands of optimism in what Sarah was saying. The semi-optimistic note to end on. I want to thank you all for your questions and your thoughts. If you're left with lingering questions and lingering thoughts, well, even if you're not, please stick around and join us. We have a lovely spread, and we'd love to hang out with you even more informally than this. I want to thank our panelists, Sarah Kim, Allan Peterkin, Karen Gold. I'm Damian Tarnopolsky from the lab. Thank you all very much for being here.